Alright everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name's Nisarius, and the video started. So, today I'm bringing you a video talking about the reputation of Lance, the perception that new players have of the Lance, and essentially why is Lance such an unpopular weapon. And, obviously, if you ask this question to most Monster Hunter players, the default response is going to be because it's not a flashy weapon. And that's definitely partially true. That's definitely a part of the answer. But I think it's an oversimplification, and I think there's a lot more to it that, in a lot of ways, the community itself is at fault here. And I'll get more into that later. But, just quick overview. Some things I plan to talk about in this video are going to be about the community, content creators, the skill floor, the gap between the skill floor and the skill ceiling. But before we get into any of that, I want to first talk about myself as a Lance player, sort of establish my credentials, as it were. If you don't care about any of that, feel free to skip ahead. There will be chapters set up for you to do so. But let's get into that, or to get into this. So I've been playing since Monster Hunter 1. I've been a Lance main since Monster Hunter 1. And I don't know how many hours I have on Lance, but I'd give a rough estimate that it's probably at least 10,000 hours. Now that said, I'm pretty washed up. I don't really consider myself a very good Lance player these days. But I've been playing Lance for a very, very, very long time. A very long time, right? And I've sort of seen the evolutions of Lance and how people thought of Lance. And I definitely will say that, perhaps it's just bias, but I think up until World, Lance had, not a terrible reputation. Basically that, or at least in my opinion, the reputation that Lance had up until World was that Lancet was a good but boring weapon, right? Generally. Obviously, there were still the same sort of reputation issues that it currently has, that it's a slow defensive weapon, and it's bad, and those do exist, back in the day, but I feel like the more prevalent opinion was that it was good but boring, right? And again, it made a pretty hefty shift in World. And the first thing I want to talk about, and I'm going to be talking about the modern perception more than anything, as I'm mentioning the historical perception, but I care more about the modern perception. And the first thing I definitely want to talk about is the community of Monster Hunter, and kind of the role we have in the reputation of Lance. So let's get into it. So Monster Hunter World involved a massive influx of new players and new content creators to the Monster Hunter community, right? And this goes without saying, World was kind of the first time that Monster Hunter came to the mainstream. And obviously, when this happened, the newer players, the newer content creators are going to look into what is kind of the already pre-established opinions of the weapons, right? Because there's no new weapons. These weapons have existed for a while, so what do people think of them already? And as I mentioned before, I feel like the previous reputation of Lance was that it was good but boring, right? And then in Monster Hunter World, so this is all, and again, this is already not a positive opinion, right? The fact that it's boring already is a net negative, right, for the weapon's reputation. But especially going into World where Lance was not spectacular in terms of damage output, this definitely sort of snowballed, right? We had all these pre-established opinions combined with new opinions, and combined with not all veteran Lance players were happy with the differences to from World Lance from previous Lance, right? World was a pretty big shake-up for Lance, and it kind of represents the major shift from where we were doing a lot of evade lancing to when we really shift hard into guard lancing, right? And there were quite a few Lance mains who weren't particularly happy about that, didn't like the new Lance, didn't like the changes to Lance. But I feel like all of these things sort of kind of snowball, where the general community opinion is sort of already set up to be bad, right? It's already sort of set up to where people are going to have a very negative opinion of the weapon, right? And I think this ends up being reinforced by content creators. Now, I'm going to name any names here. I'm not trying to start any drama or beef, But I will say, I feel like there are definitely a lot of larger content creators that they do sort of, they make these videos where it's like, basic introductions to all the weapons, right? And in Lance, the thing you will hear the most common is Lance is a defensive slow weapon, right? And Lance is a weapon about, blocking the monster's attacks and getting damage in the openings afterward. Which, while isn't inherently wrong, the way that these content creators tend to represent Lance has not exactly been particularly accurate, right? Because if you've been a Lance player for any amount of time, you'll know that Lance is not a particularly slow or defensive weapon at all. Lance is actually a very aggressive weapon, especially if you want to be doing good DPS. You play Lance rather aggressively, right? And even in Rise, where we sort of adapt a more, in terms of like the meta play style, was more of insta blocking and silk bite spam, it's still a very aggressive play style, right? But I definitely feel like a lot of larger content creators sort of, I don't think they do it maliciously or even intentionally. I think it's just probably the impression they have of the weapon, right? It's not their, and again, this isn't their fault either, right? Because not only is that the impression that the overall Monster Hunter community has, it's the impression that the game itself gives you. So if you're not a Lance main, someone who plays a lot of Lance, I would forgive you for having that opinion. And it's understandably so. But I do think it ends up sort of compounding, right? And one issue just makes the other worse. Like, one issue causes the other issue, which makes the original issue worse, right? Is kind of what's going on here, I think. In terms of, like, the community's involvement of the opinion around Lance, right? And again, I don't want to, like, try to start any beef with anybody. I don't think anyone has any negative intentions about the way they portray Lance. It's just the way it is, right? But, yeah, I think that's kind of all the things I really want to talk about here. And the next thing I want to talk about is the gap between the skill floor of Lance and the skill ceiling of Lance, right? Let's get into that. So let's start by just defining what a skill floor and a skill ceiling is in terms of Monster Hunter, in context of Monster Hunter. And essentially, the skill floor is the absolute minimum level of skill you need to complete a hunt, right? Doesn't matter how many cards you have, how long it takes you, how many items you have to use, just that you can complete a hunt, right? And now the skill ceiling is the exact opposite of this, right? This is, the maximum level of play you can achieve with a weapon, absolute perfect play, perfect use of your moveset, perfect knowledge of the monster, using your moveset with your knowledge of the monster, and that's just what it is, right? Now, getting into Lance in this context, so Lance is a weapon with a very low skill floor, right? You can sit behind your shield and poke away, and the hunts will take you forever, but you will be able to safely clear hunts like that. Maybe not afflicted hunts because of how much HP they have, but just hunts in general. You can sit behind your shield and do guard pokes and do regular pokes when you're really safe, and you can achieve some level of success like this, right? Obviously, this doesn't take a lot of skill, very basic, but this is the skill floor of Lance. This is the bare minimum of skill you need with the weapon to achieve success. On the other hand, Lance has a very high skill ceiling, much like many weapons in Monster Hunter, right? Many weapons have very high skill ceilings, and Lance is one of them. And so there's nothing inherently wrong with either of these things. There's nothing wrong with Lance having a low skill floor, and there's nothing wrong with Lance having a high skill ceiling. The issue comes in when there's such a large gap between the skill floor and the skill ceiling, right? There's a massive gap between them. And especially if you're a new player and you're starting at the lower end of that skill gap, it's going to take a lot more effort with Lance to achieve the same level of success that if you spent the same level on another, the same amount of effort on another weapon that you could achieve with that weapon, right? And just to give an example, if you spent 10 hours learning Lance and you spent 10 hours learning Switch Axe, you're going to have much better success with Switch Axe, right? You're going to have better success with Switch Axe than you'll have with Lance in the same amount of time. And you know, Lance isn't the only weapon that suffers from this issue. Sword and Shield is another fantastic weapon, another fantastic example of this issue, right? But again, what this really causes is it effectively cements the opinion that, you know, a new player learning Lance probably already drew from the community, right? And Lance is a slow, boring, defensive, bad weapon. You know, because they're at that lower skill floor, they experience that low skill floor playstyle, which is what people are talking about when they say about Lance, right? That's what they're talking about. They're talking about that minimum skill playstyle. Which, as you know, once you get better with Lance, that's not how you're going to play Lance, you know? But again, it just cements the opinion that they were probably already drawing from what they saw about the weapon in the community, what impressions the game itself gave them about the weapon, right? And again, it just ends up cementing that opinion in place. And you know, I don't think maybe this is like the biggest reason that this opinion happens. I think this is what causes it to stick. I think this is what causes it to stick. Not so much what causes it to develop, but so much what causes it to stick, right? I know I'm repeating myself, but I think that's important. You know, we've got the cause, and we've got the root cause, and then we've got the you know, the establishing cause. Now, that said, we didn't really talk about this topic without talking about how flashy or not flashy Lance is, right? Well, let's talk about that really quickly. So, Lance isn't flashy, and well, I mean, this is true. Plain and simple, this is true, right? Lance doesn't really do anything crazy like some of the other weapons do. You know, we don't get an SAED, we don't get an elemental discharge, we don't fly around like Insect Glaive, we don't get the helm splitter or any of the other crazy stuff Longsword does. Lance doesn't do anything that incredibly flashy, right? You know, like probably the flashiest thing Lance does is, you know, just stuff like getting parries, right? And you know, even our parry follow-ups aren't that flashy, you know? If I sit here, you know, I insta-block this, I get my cross sweep, and you know, okay, cool, I got a parry, that's cool. Oh look, I'm counter thrusting. And he's like, oh, I got a parry, I got a big poke afterwards. That's cool. But I mean, yeah, Lance doesn't do anything flashy. Like, that's absolutely true. There's no denying that, right? For sure. And you know, I don't really know how important that actually is to the general opinion of the weapon. I think it's far less important than people think it is, right? I really think the biggest issue on the Lance's reputation is caused by the community itself. And then, like I mentioned in the last section, that opinion is then cemented by the gap between the skill floor and the skill ceiling of Lance, right? And you know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe you disagree. No, I don't have like numbers to back it up or anything. It's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think. If you think there's different causes, or if there's other things that are causing it. You know, maybe there's more issues that kind of stack on the things I've already talked about. Etc. Right? But I think that's gonna be it for this video, guys. And that's pretty much all there really is to talk about. Those are the main issues I think that are causing the reputation problem with Lance. And I just kind of wanted to talk about it. It came up on stream the other day, and we were talking about it, and I kind of just wanted to make a video about it. So here we go. But again, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Till then, take it easy, everybody.